This is going to be a tutorial to get you started with serverless and AWS Lambda functions and Node. If you're not familiar with serverless or AWS Lambda functions, in a traditional scenario you would have your server, and your server serves up your front end, it serves up all of your back end API stuff, all your endpoints. What AWS has done is said, let us take care of the server, and you just write code and put it on our server, and that's a Lambda function. So rather than having a server, you go serverless, hence the name of this framework, and you write code and you put it on AWS. Rather than going in and manually putting all that on there, serverless framework lets you write it on your code editor like you're used to, and then you hit deploy, basically, and it sends all the information up to AWS to write it in there for you. Serverless is cool. It does it for AWS, it does it for Azure, all kinds of stuff. So good framework. This is a quick tutorial for that. So I'm going to be following this quick start guide. If you go to serverless.com, or just type in serverless docs, it'll be this first one here. If you go to developers and quick starts, I'm doing the AWS quick start, and that's the same page that we're on here. So first thing you need to do is download Node on your computer. If you haven't done that yet, you can go here, nodejs.org, and basically just hit download for Mac or Windows or whatever you're using. Once you have Node, you need to download the serverless CLI. And if you download Node, it'll let you run this command in your terminal and do that for you. If you're on a Windows, your terminal by default doesn't do Git stuff very well. So you can also download Git Bash, which is what I'm using here. And install globally the serverless framework. Let that run. It'll download for you. You need to have an AWS account. If you don't, you can sign up here. It's free to sign up. They will take your credit card information, but they don't charge you anything unless you do $1 million something a month. I don't know what it is. I've never paid. But basically, you sign up for free and put in your credit card information, and they won't charge you. Once you have signed up, you go ahead and log in. Okay, sweet. First thing we're going to do, in the services, you're going to search for the IAM. We're going to create a user profile for our project. And once you get here, you click on users. We're going to create a user. And this is you can name it whatever you want. I'm going to name this user serverless demo, and you're going to give it programmatic access. So basically, we're creating a user. We're going to give our serverless framework the access credentials for this user so that when we hit deploy, it sends it to the right place and it has access. Your user is going to be added to a group, and your group has the permissions. So we're going to create a group, and I'm just going to call mine full access. You just basically put your name here, whatever you want. Whatever. And for serverless to work correctly, it needs full access to everything currently. So you just do this administrator access one and create a group. And then if you have some groups already, all of them will be listed right here. You just select which ones you want this new user that you're creating to be added to. In this case, I'm adding it to the full access group, and you create user. And this is going to give you your access key ID and secret access key. And what I'm actually going to do is, if you cd into the root directory, it has all these different things you can do. We're going to go into the .aws. And this has the credentials file. We're going to go inside of it. If you haven't been in here before, it's probably blank. We're going to create a profile, essentially. So we're going to grab this information, and we're going to paste it into this file. So if yours is blank, you basically do whatever profile name you want here. This could be your serverless demo. I'm gonna create a new one. So I'm gonna create a profile called serverless demo, and you have your AWS access key ID. Oh crap. And I want to copy this in. And your secret access key. Okay, we're going to save this file. If you're using Nano, it's Control O to save, hit Enter, and then Control X to get out. So we just created a profile. I'm going to hop back in there for a second. We created a profile called Serverless Demo, and we're going to use that in a second on our serverless project. One thing to note, this user that I just created has full access to my Amazon account, and that is hooked to my credit card. So don't give this information out. Don't push this information to GitHub. If it does get out somehow, just go delete that user. Okay, so this user, it has these access credentials, but it's specific to the user. So if you go to your IAM, it'll show you all your users, and it's really easy to delete it if you need to. Okay, so we created the profile. Now the next thing in the quick start guide, I'm going to be using Node. If you're using GraphQL, there's one for that as well. Let's do the Node one real quick. Okay, so let's see. Actually, here we go. Okay, here's the folder I want. So I'm going to create a new file or a new project, serverless demo, and we're going to go into it and npm init f. Okay, so we're going to go and cd into that folder, and we're going to npm init f. And what this does is create a package.json file. And I'm actually going to open this up in my code editor as well so we can visualize that. Okay, so that init command that we just did created this package.json, and this is going to basically be it's your Node package manager's way of controlling or seeing what's in the project, basically, like the basics of it. So now we're going to install this, all of these libraries. So we're installing the Express library and the Serverless HTTP library. And as those install, you'll actually see them pop up here as dependencies. So once again, this is just keeping track of all the different things being used in the project. And you can name this whatever you want. What is that? I'm not sure why mine doesn't like the capital letter, I guess. That's okay. Okay, so then what we're going to do is create an index.js file. And you can do that in your terminal, or you can do that right in your code editor. Oopa. And then I'm not going to get into too much of what this code does, but basically we're requiring those different libraries that we just installed, and then we're going to create an endpoint that says if anybody makes a GET request to our base URL / nothing in this case, just our base URL, we're going to return this to them. Okay, so this is creating an API endpoint, basically. I'm just going to copy all this into my project and hit save. And the next thing we want to do is create a serverless.yaml file, and on the root level of our project. And the serverless framework looks at this file to figure out how to deploy, what to deploy, etc. So what we're doing is you're going to name whatever you want, basically. You give it a name, and then for the provider, you're going to tell it that you want to use AWS, you're going to tell it what runtime you want for Node, etc. So we're going to copy this in. And you'll notice that we're deploying, or telling it we're going to deploy one function. We've called this function app. You can call it whatever you want. And this is where it finds the function that it should fire off. So for instance, in this case, our app function, it says for your handler, go to the index file and look for a handler function. So in our index file, we are exporting a handler function, which is essentially using this library to create a function. And then on that, we can create different endpoints. One thing to note here, serverless is going to try and deploy, and it needs to know where to deploy. So we're going to add the profile right here. And what did we call it? Serverless demo. So we're going to add our profile right there so that when we tell it to deploy, it'll know to grab these security credentials when it pushes up to Amazon. And that's basically it. So we're going to run this command, SLS deploy, and make sure you're in your project. And my computer's pretty slow, so the deploy takes a second. So I'm going to pause, and when it's done deploying, I'll come back. Okay, it finished deploying, and you'll notice that it lists your endpoints here. Now what this means is Amazon is hosting that function. You wrote a function and you deployed it to AWS Lambda, and it's telling you if you visit this URL, your function will run. Oh. Let's see, copy that. Okay, let's visit the function or the URL, and there we go. It returns hello world. It returns hello world because that's what we told it to do right here. So, I mean, that's it. You just deployed a Lambda function. In essence, you just wrote a backend endpoint. You can do anything at this point. You can do anything you want in here. You can connect to a database and get information out of the database. You can write multiple of these and, get users, and you hit your database and you get all the user information, and then you return it here, whatever you want to do. So this is the basics to using a Lambda function. At this point, you can create a full backend essentially, but you don't have to manage your own server. Amazon will do that for you, and you just worry about the code. You write the logic and deploy it. And that's basically it. You can deploy, when you do this SLS deploy or serverless deploy, it deploys everything that you've written. We could tell it to deploy just this one function. You might end up with a ton of endpoints and a ton of different functions here. Function number 2, all kinds of stuff. You can have your database right in there. So if you keep going with this tutorial, it'll show you how to build DynamoDB tables as well. And so if we copied this in here, now we're telling it we want you to create a DynamoDB table, and DynamoDB is another service offered on the AWS. And we're going to, I don't know, I haven't done that part of the tutorial, but and so if you do the full deploy, it'll deploy your tables and everything. So if you just want to deploy one specific function that you've updated, just for speed, because the full deploy takes a second, you'll do function and tell it what function name. So in this case, it would deploy the app function. And that's a little bit quicker because it doesn't have to deploy your full application. It just deploys the one function. So that's basically it. That'll get you started. I hope you enjoyed it.